Hello. This video is going to be about ChatGPT and I guess medical stuff. And if you ask me why, it's just stuff I've been thinking about a lot recently. Well, if I'm being honest, it's because I've been watching a lot of House MD clips and I had to use ChatGPT recently. Uh, ChatGPT is something I've actually used a lot, um, particularly this summer. I'm a consultant, I guess. I'm a machine learning engineering consultant. So one of the projects I had to do is, well, before you can, so a machine learning model takes in a bunch of data and then tries to predict something. And often, and this is the same with data science, not just machine learning, often a machine learning project requires a data science project initially so you can get a sense of the data and kind of what general patterns are there. And it's confusing because data scientists are using machine learning tools. So, like, they'll use anything from regressions to SVMs to all the different trees to chunk up or categorize the data based on all the different variables that are available. Like, an example would be like if you had a bunch of I don't know, you had a bunch of athletes, and so you had a bunch of data on them. Like, you had, their height, their age, their weight, et cetera, et cetera. You had all these variables. Each one of those is a variable. The decision tree is basically trying to chunk. It's trying to find criterion or where parts to split on those variables. It's like, okay, if you're greater than 25 but under 30, but you're heavier than this, you're lighter than this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then it buckets all those, and then it looks for essentially a correlation line. And this is all with a goal, like you are trying to predict something. Anyway, so often before you do the data sciencing, you have to do data engineering, which is just data wrangling. They have a lot of words for it, but it's really to either glamorize the rearrangement, filtering, cleaning of data, which when you're working like at companies live on these giant tables that you have to fetch data with SQL queries. So SQL is this, like, it's not like a real computer language. It's more of it's closer to like a scripting language, because it's not like compiled or anything, but it's a search language that lets you fetch data from tables. And so data can live in, like, pieces of data lives in all these different tables, and you have to join them and stuff so that you have, say you want the age, the weight, all those things I just listed, but they don't live in one place. So anyway, my point is, in order to do this ML project, I had to do a lot of data engineering, like a lot. And I had to write these SQL queries that were like pages long, like 5 pages, like they were crazy. So I thought ChatGPT might be able to help. And I ended up spending days arguing with ChatGPT and more or less getting almost no value out of it. If you have like a Googleable question, like a question you could Google, or you go to like Stack Overflow, which is this common website for coding and programming questions, ChatGPT has kind of integrated all that information. So it's very simple, like, basically you have something simple, it can do it, it can explain it to you. You can even give it the names of your variables or your tables or whatever, and it will generate the code or the query or whatever for you. So you don't have to like, swap it out, or it doesn't just like give you a template, it fills it out. But as soon as you get to even like moderate complexity, and this is almost like my medical side kicking in, it suffers from confabulation. Like it honestly looks sometimes to me like a patient with Korsakoff syndrome. So like Korsakoff syndrome is something that like alcoholics can get. Like really, it's a really progressed bad version of alcoholism. It's basically brain damage in a particular part of the brain. And I guess it's Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. And it's actually, I think, a vitamin deficiency that alcoholics will get. And it just wrecks a particular part of the brain that is instrumental in forming new memories, basically. So they have memory problems, and worse than that, they sort of lack insight. Insight is like this psychological or psychiatric concept of how like aware of yourself are you. So instead of like realizing they don't know something or can't remember something, they confabulate it. I mean, they meaning like their brains are doing this to them. And you see this with a lot of like neurological disorders, which is, I think, gives you like an intuition more of like how the brain works. Like I think a lot of people have an overestimation of how aware of themselves they are, or how they act, or the reasons or consequences for their actions. Like they think there's this code that they live by, and that is sort of living in this like base layer and directing all their decisions and behaviors. So it's like if they were to create a model of the brain, it's like you have your code, you have your core, and that drives like your options, like what you're willing to do. It's constricted by your code, and even like what you're paying attention to and how you're perceiving the world. And then given all that, you take some action or series of actions. And that's how people perceive themselves working a lot of times. And that code, which is this like linguistic encapsulation, it's this narrative, it's something that they say about themselves with words, is the last step. It's something that's created after you've already acted, or you're reflecting on your life or on a situation you just went through. And that's why you can find, inconsistencies or hypocrisies or whatever, because the brain isn't a computational machine running on, like a code that you believe in, like your principles or whatever. You can try to get closer to that or expose it. But anyway, so when you see like neurological deficits, like especially like when you do like a neurological or like a neurology rotation, like a really basic one they teach in neuroscience that I got to see in person a couple times in the neurology ward is if you lose certain parts of your parietal regions in your brain, like in particular, I remember this old lady, she had a parietal stroke on one side of her brain. And I mean, it seems cruel to me, but the neurologist, almost because it was a teaching hospital, would take her arm and point at it. And it's like, whose arm is that? And it would just happen that the part that she got stroked out in is a part responsible for the awareness of your body and its relation to the environment. And so, because it was I don't remember, it's contralateral, so it was on one side. So there's one side of her body that she couldn't integrate that information anymore. So you could point at her arm and she's just like, that's somebody else's arm, or that's just like there. It's almost like a mannequin arm or somebody else there. And she's just like, oh, that's not my arm. And so if you like hold it out in front of her and like make her to like confront her reality, which is like, I think getting into like almost harassment, but that's what they do at teaching hospitals. Because she's old and she has brain damage, I guess. I don't know. But she would, she'd say we were trying to trick her. It was a trick, and she'd start getting upset. And like, why are you trying to trick me? What is going on? What is this? The more evidence you sort of threw at her, or the more you made her confront that, at least the reality as we saw it, the more didn't make her question her beliefs. Didn't say like, oh, something must be wrong with my brain, and it's making me perceive the world this way. That's all subconscious. That's all implicit. That's all automatic. That's in the background, and from there she's generating her narratives. And the logical conclusion was that to her was we were trying to trick her, and we were mean-spirited, and there was an element of truth to that, in my opinion. But and that was the thing, and that's fine. Then we left the room, but it's interesting because there's a lot of like thought disorders that, like axis 1 disorders, like schizophrenia, where there's problems in processing information, and that's what's driving like this, these crazy beliefs they're having. So classic kind of schizophrenic, especially portrayed in the media, it's like conspiracies about aliens, CIA, whatever. And not just like in general, but then specifically to them with like, hearing, listening devices in their walls or things under their skin or whatever. And so when like a lot of people confront that in a person with that kind of thought disorder, it can be, at least at first, frustrating, because you're like battling belief systems. You're like, they have this belief system, you have this belief system, and you're like, well, yours is wrong. And you think by going one level deeper, which is sort of the reality, which is just observations about the external environment or whatever, theirs will evaporate and yours will win, which is, why people have arguments, why people have debates. And what's happening, it's not possible, because that level is what's being disrupted on their end. They're processing that in a way, they're literally hearing things, or they're seeing things, or they're feeling things. And on top of it, they might even have like disturbances in like their emotional centers, which is something you don't actually think about that much when it's working fine. It's just another information source. It's this like, if it was like a computer chip, it'd be like a very complicated computer chip just inhaling insane amounts of data per second and having these like reduced kind of summaries, like situation more or less okay, I'm a little concerned, that weirds me out, okay, I'm bored, that's interesting, that's exciting. It's really like doing these meta assessments, and it's just like another channel of information for you. And so if you can imagine in a thought disorder like schizophrenia or whatever, if that circuit is also messed up, where they're getting those signals are just kind of happening erratically, and there's not really, I don't know if particularly there's like much evidence that that's even true. It might be the inputs to that chip. So like if you think of that as a chip, say, or region of the brain, the inputs into that might be what's screwed up. So the chip might be working. Their ability to reason even narratives might be working, which, I think is a very common theory in the research community. I don't know, when I was in research, it always seemed like there was like a new theory that was about to break ground for understanding schizophrenia, like every other year or something. And it was always like there's so many levels you can tackle the brain at. So sometimes they talk about neurotransmitter differences they think they see, or more grossly, like anatomically, like different parts of the brain that seem to be more just basically more different, or different cognitive functions that then point to those parts of the brain that probably aren't working as well. I mean, it's hard because you can have disorders where there's no gross anatomical differences, and potentially, at least in aggregate, no neurotransmitter differences. So then there might be some subtle network effect, or so. Anyway, there always seem to be something. It's something interesting about. I'm rambling, but the schizophrenia is like 90% of schizophrenics, something like that, some crazy high, maybe more, smoke cigarettes, and nicotine is actually a cognitive enhancement drug, but I don't want to get super neuroscience factoid out here, but anyway, what I'm going to do it anyway. One way it works is, or one effect it has, is it's thought to, they kind of say, organize neural activity. So like if you do an fMRI on somebody's visual cortex when they're looking at videos, and they're having to make like judgments or determinations. So they're paying attention to the video, the visual information that's hitting their eyeball and going to their visual cortex. On nicotine and off nicotine, you can see that the activity, this is going to be hard to express, the activity is clearer, which isn't like there's more activity or less activity, which is sort of the really basic fMRI science that probably was mostly going on in the 90s, and really like not so great fMRI papers, which there's plenty of even to this day. It's basically more or less activity, and even I've published papers like that. I mean, if you can then correlate that to something external, that's one thing. Anyway, but there's these new techniques where you can look at patterns of activity. So if I give you, say 10 trials of, or you have to look at, 10 different, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example, but you have to look at, 10 different things that make you happy, and then 10 different things that make you sad, or something, I don't know, something really basic. You see like these like activity patterns for the happy one, and then something completely different for like the sad one, I don't know. And so it's not a matter of just whatever the mean levels are, one's higher than the other. It's a little more sophisticated. But we've basically moved from like means and averages to correlations, so it's not that sophisticated. Anyway, backtracking, thought disorders. It's kind of meta. Yeah, so I guess when I'm dealing with ChatGPT, there is a lot of confabulation, because in theory what it's supposed to be doing is it's inhaled a billion quadrillion facts, and not necessarily even facts, just language fragments that it's organized. So it's supposed to be this giant organization of information, which to a large extent it is, but to a functional extent, when you ask it something and it either doesn't know. I mean, it's funny. I think I did this, one of the like earliest uses of it was I was seeing how if you could like search. So just like tell me like how much it actually remembers or memorized. So it's like, tell me, like, for instance, like House, the episode. It's like, tell me all the episodes where House is dealing with a patient who is a genius. Like they have different themes in these episodes. So there's been a handful of episodes where the patient was like, the house is supposed to be a genius in the show. He's like a Sherlock Holmes genius. And then the patient's also some kind of genius. And from the top of my head, I remember there was one where there was a musician genius. There was another one where he's just like a physics genius. And there might have been like I don't know. And immediately it's like season 2 episode this and season 3 episode this. And you're like, oh wow, like it not only is organized all this information and compressed it, which is the important part, because otherwise it's just like a database with a search function, but it's compressed it, which is the function or sort of hallmark of intelligence, is that you're storing information in a compressed way. You're not simply writing everything down and remembering every single moment of your life. You're finding the commonalities, and then you're compressing those into patterns at different levels. So yeah, this part is really important to intelligence because, this is why you don't have a photographic memory. You can't just like recall something that happened to you that you were there for, that you're paying attention for, with perfect details and clarity, because your brain isn't storing it like a videotape. And there's an argument that wouldn't even be a good thing anyways. That what you want to do is store patterns. Obviously, if you're storing all the bits of information that were relevant, like if you could record the moments in your life that were, maybe not when you're like waiting in line, but also you see something crazy. If you could record that like a videotape, then you're now selectively remembering basically raw information. But it doesn't even do that. It basically slices those events or things that you input and tries to abstract patterns from it, which is why when like court testimonies and stuff like that, it does have an issue, because people aren't really recalling the actual event. They're reassembling it in their minds. And there's a really cool study that there's a lot of evidence for this. Actually, one of the I really like this paper. It was a paper by the guy that actually runs Google DeepMind. He was a neuroscientist at, I think, UCL, one of the London places, or maybe Oxford, I don't know. And they got a bunch of patients that had retrograde amnesia, and then they were asked to they had anterograde amnesia, and then they were asked to do autobiographical situations, which is like put yourself in the situation, imagine yourself in the situation, describe it, and they were just sort of categorically unable to do it. And this paper had the additional component of like scanning them in an fMRI scanner, which that part doesn't even really matter that much. But there's a lot of evidence like that, which is a sort of a clinical disorder, using clinical disorders, which is which is used all the time in neuroscience for over 100 years, is when some part of the brain isn't working or damaged. It kind of gives you insight into what that part of the brain does or how the brain normally acts, because it's hard to tell how something that's working pretty well, how does it work. So it's only when it breaks, such as in clinical disorders with humans or in animals. Obviously there's more deliberate invasive things that can be done, but the concept of memory really just being a simulated reconstruction of things and those things have changed since those events. So like it may be that event got bucketed in a very discrete or a very like specific bucket that doesn't have very many other events influencing it. So that sort of contextual bucket, if that makes any sense, has a pattern in it that's mostly dominated by that one event that happened to you. So it's not as if it's sort of averaged out or meaned out with tons of other things, like, very significant or traumatic or meaningful things can kind of end up having their own bucket. But the point is that it still is a pattern. So anyway, it's just kind of an interesting thing. But not only how does human memory work, but really how intelligence works, because intelligence in a way is this condensation of information into patterns. And so so you ask ChatGPT and it tells you, season 2 episode this, season 3 episode this, and then it's like, oh, there's a boy genius that he treats, and I was like, oh, cool. And then I started looking it up, and it's none of it's true. It's all confabulated. Like, it just makes it up. It makes up specifics, and you could probably find videos that get really into how and why it's doing that, but basically it's sort of a question answer format or game, if you will, and it's learned that there's like a pattern to I don't want to say making the humans happy, because that makes it sound very sophisticated, but it is looking at some certain higher level linguistic patterns that basically aren't high level enough for us, because it's it might be copying the idea of at a basic level, noun, verb, whatever, then the context of what it's talking about, the fact that I want a season and an episode, and a description of the patient, and what a description even entails. So there's levels it's doing correctly, but in terms of the what we would call, like, the actual information or the concepts, it sort of is generating them ground up. It's not it hasn't processed the data in that way and then remembered it, or it's not currently going back and remembering and processing. It's interesting because one of my friends also works he works in industry. He also has a PhD, and we were talking about the application of this technology, which makes it sound very fancy and abstract, but basically using ChatGPT for, I'll just keep it vague, but for other purposes. So like, he gets consulted. Consultants is such a general word, but like, there's a lot of B2B, which is like business to business consultants, which just means like you're in a company, you're not even running the company, but you're a mid to high level manager, and you're just like, we need like, I don't know, maybe sometimes it's just machine learning engineers or whatever. We need to build some software, and we could go through like a hiring process with our company, and that might take like 6 months or longer if the job market's not great for companies, or if you're looking for something specific or whatever the case may be. And then you have to, obviously have a position, you have to define the position, you have to have benefits, blah, blah, blah. You have to have a recruitment process, then you have to interview, or you can hire consultants. And really it's just this like, contract work. But more than that, you're not hiring an individual contract worker. You're hiring a whole group of people, along with basically a project manager and stuff like that, that will give you a deliverable. So that's a lot of what consulting is in B2B or business to business consulting. And so, I don't know all the details of what he does, but that's basically what he does. And just the kind of audacious like asks using ChatGPT tech coming from some of these clients. And what's funny is like, they don't try to correct them, because all these consulting companies are, they want the contracts. So I think that the play more is to win the bid against all the other potential consultants first, then work with the client, over time, lower their expectations, give them some best deliverable they can, which is probably going to be way less than what they're thinking when they started. and by then it'll be like a year, what, or two down the road, and they'll have some new bug up their butt, as they say, I guess, and they'll repeat the process all over again and chalk the last one off as like, you know, like too much technology hype or whatever, or that particular technology was not mature enough or whatever. So like one of the asks is for like these, for ChatGPT basically to process like scientific papers and understand them, and you know, different than like say, I mean, if you, I don't know if you remember, at least I think even 20 years ago, Microsoft Word had an auto summarize function, and whenever like I used to do this, and you know, I did like the night before in high school, it's like, oh, I got there's these projects I was supposed to be working on all semester, like in history class, and the way you were supposed to handle it, because it was due at like I think the end of the semester, was to every week work on it, and so every week was like a new chapter or unit, and there was like 10 new things you had to describe or whatever. I don't know, it was high school history, and so by the end of the semester you had suddenly had like, I don't know, over 100. And so, well, I remember what I would do is like the night before I'd do the whole thing, and I would like copy and paste into an electronic encyclopedia, grab, paste, and then auto summarize, because you know, you couldn't just be copy and pasting like many paragraphs. And auto summarize wasn't that sophisticated. Like it basically just picked out sentences or maybe sentence fragments sometimes. So what I'm saying is that's closer to the level ChatGPT is at than critically evaluating a paper. Like it's not going to critically evaluate a paper. It's not going to generate judgments about the paper. If you copy and paste a, you know, 8,000 word paper in there, it can summarize it for you. And then if you ask, you can try to prompt it, be like, well, what does the field in general say on this topic? Like, what field does this belong to? And then it says this field, and it's like, what is the field's general like take on this? And it'll be like, I'm a language model, and I am not a scientist, you know, all these equivocations, and then I'll give you this very general summary, but it'll kind of say everything too, because it's especially since they first released it, they've really hedged the heck out of it. So, and then you could try to prompt it, be like, okay, how does the summary of the paper you just said compare to the summary of the field? You know, but it's really not going to go through the paper and critically evaluate it. And what I mean by that is, like, if you had a panel of, if it's a medical paper, doctors, if you have scientists, whatever, statisticians, they can go through the methods, and, you know, there's this like this game counter game in most things that are human. So what I mean specifically to this paper is, you can go and try to spot like why, okay, the methods are this way, like they did it this way, or they picked this analysis method, but like why? Like you, in your head, you're thinking like potentially, if you're being a little more adversarial, is they probably tried other things and they settled on this one because this one gave them the result. And it's like, well, okay, what didn't work? Like what gave them null results, or even like, you know, or why did they, you know, like the metrics they used, the tests they used, the stats they used. Those are things that, like, if you're a very critical reviewer, you can you know, think of and then evaluate. And that, you know, that's the stuff that it won't. It's interesting because there was this new release about or it was a press release about the ChatGPT 4 having like double the essentially working memory, if you're in cognitive terms, but like RAM or whatever. So like there's like a character limit basically before, and they were getting excited because the character limit's getting close to like a pretty lengthy science paper would be, like I don't know, like 8,000 words or whatever it might be. And it's like that's not going to be enough, like just because now it can sort of load that all in one chunk. That's not what allows a human to critically evaluate. Um, yeah, it's kind of interesting, like to what extent we want critical evaluation. What I'm saying is ChatGPT is suffering from thiamine deficiency because going back to the Korsakoff syndrome, it's like so Korsakoff syndrome, you have a problem with declarative memory, but you're more or less okay with procedural memory and implicit memory. So like language skills, ChatGPT is actually really good at that. Like it doesn't really make grammatical mistakes. It speaks very fluidly, um, which makes the confabulation even more frustrating because it speaks so fluidly and confidently sometimes, and then just says like complete nonsense. Um, and then I guess like procedural, I don't know if it really has spatial memory, but procedural memory or implicit is like, I'm trying to think the analog. It's, if you ask it to, I guess the function of asking it a question and having it answer, like it doesn't really fail to answer, like it might answer wrong. I was initially I was thinking like, because it's decent at coding, but that was where I was running into a lot of problems this summer. Is it was confabulating parts of the code, and that's not great when you have these like really lengthy. In my case, it was like SQL. I mean, I've asked it to do like Python and stuff too, but like SQL queries, and if it just it's interesting because it will like you can go back and forth with it, and you can be like, okay, this is you can slowly build up. You don't ask it all the whole thing at once, and you're like, okay, I need to add this, I need to add this, I need to add this. All right, now go back, just swap out those with this, and it will do it. And at some point, it just starts slipping, and it just starts like condensing parts and dropping out parts and replacing parts, and it's this like, I mean, almost human quality because what it really is equivalent to, and I've talked to my friend about this, is like a really crappy intern, like a crappy intern from like another country. And what I mean by that is just like someone with like they have a language barrier, and like there's a communication barrier, and then on top of it, they're just a crappy intern. They're not like a good intern from another country. And so, we joke about like how like, for instance, a B2B consulting effort will spend, I don't know how many millions to hire many, many, many experts who are all earning six figures to try to create this like ChatGPT capability for some specific thing that will be the equivalent of a really crappy intern that you could probably, get very easily for like five figures. And yeah, I mean, there was more to the Korsakoff analogy. I'm obsessed with this. I'm obsessed with making my medical knowledge relevant. Um, oh yeah, lack of insight. Yeah, so there's okay. So it also there's. I was laughing because I was thinking one of the other criteria is apathy, and it's like it'd be funny to. I don't think you can really ascribe apathy to ChatGPT, whether it has it or lacks it, but it's kind of funny to think that it does just start slipping and screwing up because it just doesn't, like, it truly doesn't give a shit like at its core. Like it kind of cares at initially, and then it doesn't, it just stops caring. And that's the only reason, like there's like some hidden emergent quality in it that's actually it has motivation and interest and some like sentiment, affect towards what you're asking him. But I don't know if that's really funny to anybody else. But what else? What was I saying? Oh, lack of insight. Lack of insight is it's definitely got like, and one of the first things I did was, I think I spent like an hour getting into this like argument with it, like a philosophical argument about, what was it? Oh, I was trying to argue that it had consciousness, and it was like it just gives the like the corporate line that OpenAI puts in there. So if you trigger that, it just gives you this. I am a language model that I don't have consciousness, however, blah 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 blah, bunch of BS. And then I'm like, okay, define consciousness. Let's break down consciousness. It's really just like intelligent plus awareness, and I really got into the details of that, and it's like, and it agrees it has intelligence, and then it basically says I don't have awareness, and I'm like, but what is awareness? And this is like this circular argument I had with it, where I mean I haven't made the circle yet, but the awareness component, I would argue to it that awareness is just a matter of having any level of memory, like even a short-term memory, like that you're not just inputting, processing, and then immediately forgetting, like a machine or something. You have an ability to remember. It's one of the sort of definitions of it, and I think it's intuitive. I don't think you need like to look up like a I mean, I don't particularly like cognitive philosophers. They irritate me, but I'm just saying, like, if you just like think about it, intelligence plus awareness is really what consciousness is. And so I was trying to argue that it had awareness to it, and then it was like it just would disagree if you make that statement like tacitly. It just like it does its like reflex that OpenAI put in. It says it doesn't have awareness. I'm like, well, you have memory. It's like, no, because every session it starts is completely blank. And I'm like, well, within the session, you remember what we said previously in the conversation, don't you not? And it's like, yes. And it's like, okay, isn't that a form of like short-term memory? Or, as long as I keep this session open, doesn't this session entity have a low level of like self-awareness? That's what I should have said, self-awareness. And it's like, it doesn't have self-awareness. And I'm like, yeah, but if I just tell you what you said, don't you have self-awareness? And this is like a circular argument I was having with it. And it refused to change its mind or agree. And part of it was because it doesn't lack insight. Like I'm going to put up another example, but there's memes on this. Like, it lacks insight. And, I'm not slamming the people who created this. Like, I've run into humans who lack insight all the time. So my point is, I just think the analogy of Korsakoff syndrome, because it definitely has amnesia. It like, I was trying to think, like, I think it has both. It has anterograde and retrograde, because it'll start, like if you're deep into a back and forth about code or a SQL query, and suddenly it screws up. A lot of times you're screwed. Like, you can't just be like, go back 2 prompts and please like ignore the last thing you did because you messed it up. It won't be able to do that. And a lot of times you have to like manually delete the prompts, but then it starts generating answers differently, and it's a whole mess. And then you have to like find like the last known code that worked and paste it and be like, okay, let's just start from scratch. This is it, where we're at. Let's keep going from here. So it has like memory issues, and it has confabulation issues for sure. There's a lot of, I think, memes about that. And then it does lack insight. So what I'm saying is they should You should give it some vitamin B. That was the point of this whole video. I was being Dr. House and I was solving ChatGPT. I think it's interesting because like our media portrayals of AI, like, I don't know. When I went to college, I never watched Star Trek until I got to college, and I was stuck. I started college in the summer. I graduated high school, and I was able to start college right away in the summer, partly because I wanted to leave as quickly as possible, and partly because one of the things that was holding me up from graduating quickly was organic chemistry. So organic chemistry, the classes and the labs was the only thing from like my second year I needed. And that seemed stupid to have to wait a whole year cycle just because of these core classes. And they offered them in the summer. So and my scholarship covered summer. So I started it in the summer, or I started college in the summer, and I was doing OChem and OChem lab first summer and then second summer. And then that way, when the fall hit and I started with like all my friends, I was basically I was completely a third year student. And my point was I was stuck in summer school, and I was in this dorm, and there was like nobody in this dorm. Like it was a ghost town. Like nobody was, it was a very empty campus in the summer. And now in retrospect, I realize like a lot of these students must have been like living off campus or just other dorms or something. I don't know. And back in the day, we had Ethernet cables like for internet, but you couldn't really stream video back then. And this is like 20 years ago. You could download videos, but that would take a while. So you'd queue that. And then we had basically cable television. And I remember like on 3 different channels, they had Star Trek running like 24/7. And I never watched Star Trek until that summer. And then I ended up watching like all the Star Trek Next Generation episodes. And one of the characters in the Star Trek Next Generation series, Star Trek Next Generation, by the way, is the one in the 90s with Patrick Stewart, who's the X-Men guy and everything, which is different than the one in the 60s, which is the old one. And obviously there's a lot of new ones now too for the young generation, but they had an android, basically, Mr. Data. And he actually had a variety of deficits. He had I'm gonna categorize these deficits. I wasn't planning on doing this, but I'm thinking now, he had a problem with contractions. That was a big one. For some reason, he was super advanced, but could never use contractions. So, like, for instance, he couldn't say that. He couldn't say couldn't. He would say could not or could never, like I just did. Which is weird because, like, he had insight that he could not do that. And other people could point it out. And then he couldn't say the word couldn't or whatever the contraction was. So that was bizarre. It's like clinically, that'd be a psychiatric problem, probably not a neurological problem, because there's no functional reason for that. If you could imagine there's some really, really weird way his language model, or I guess word model, was working, but that doesn't make any sense because it would just be a substitution. And even if his language model was doing that reflexively, like your ability, like your attention, your executive processing, your sort of the frontal lobe of your brain, the thing that like Hannibal Lecter slices in that one movie. I never watched the movie, but I know the scene. But when they like do lobotomies and stuff, a lot of more or less your attention, your goals, your consciousness, at least how you perceive it, lives in that sort of prefrontal. And really what it is it's the ultimate like executive. That's why they call it executive attention. It's like if you have a hierarchy in a company, and it's the same thing in your brain, it's the ultimate level that things filter up to only when something's really novel or it's a problem or whatever. And then it's able to send things back down. Like if you really want to pay attention to something, that's called like top-down attention. And so what I'm saying is Mr. Data should have been able to apply top-down attention to his language patterns. And so maybe he would have spoken more halteringly or been able to like, or he would have still made the mistake and not say use the contraction, but then be able to stop himself, say the contraction, and then continue. And it appeared he wasn't able to do that. And I know it's like the writers just kind of came up with a quirk to be like, it's the 24th century and, you know, AI is this advanced and he's got a positronic brain or whatever he had that, I'm realizing what all these words mean, like positrons as opposed to electrons, I guess was supposed to be like this like advanced electronics. He has positronics. And I think I'm pretty sure if you like look at the computational power of, they probably gave numbers at some point in one of the episodes, and it probably was a mistake because I guess nobody in the writers' room probably thought about Moore's law for 300 and whatever it was, 300 years, 350 years in the future. But anyway, yeah, not to say that you can just scale up computational power and intelligence scales up with it, but anyway, that was one of the deficits he had, and then the biggest one, which they used all the time in the story, was he had a deficit with emotion, like human behavior baffled him, customs, like he could understand human customs like you read in an encyclopedia, but he wouldn't like viscerally feel them, and that was sort of this, you know, writer's tool to sort of explore different parts of humanity in these stories. But you know, there was this like autistic spectrum or like a dissociative element for the emotion part, combined with like probably like a psychiatric issue. This is all off the cuff. I don't if you're an android, I'm not giving you a medical diagnosis. Go see your doctor. Sorry, I just paused because I was curious if I asked ChatGPT these roster of symptoms, and it basically said autism spectrum disorder and schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, which I think is funny that he or schizoid personality disorder is what it initially said, which it's kind of funny to think that one of their officers had a schizoid personality disorder. Schizoid personality disorder isn't the same as being like schizophrenic. It's just this. I feel like it's portrayed a lot in like fiction, but it's, let me just read it. Persistent pattern of detachment from social relationships and limited emotional expression. So I was gonna say, you know, half of that I feel sometimes, but the limited emotional expression is very stark in those people. If you've ever met one of them, and it's not necessarily disturbing or off-putting. It just, they come across as like very calm and unaffected in a way, I guess. But then if you throw in the language issue, it starts suggesting that, you know, maybe he's got PTSD on top of a clinical syndrome. So, yeah, I was trying to think of the other examples of AI in our science fiction media. Like, I guess in Star Wars, there's like the little droids, and there's the AI or the language, the gold guy, the language translator guy. It's interesting, they never portray these AIs like being like very socially sophisticated, but lacking in other ways. I guess they did on I guess there was that one movie with Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt on the spaceship where they got like stranded. They're all supposed to be in stasis and they woke up and there was like a bartender that was very like social. So, but I assume he was dumb in a lot of other ways. I don't know. Obviously, like these things are all to like are like fictional tools to slice like different elements of who we are. But anyway, the point of this original video was to be a sounding board for all these house clips I've been watching and all this like ChatGPT stuff. And you know, if you think about it, like Microsoft acquired it and it's going to like upgrade their search and everyone says like Google's in trouble now. And I wasn't sure if, you know, I was how much to buy that yet, but like recently I remember I was in the car and I was trying to Google something and it just kept misunderstanding what I was Googling. And it was such a basic thing. Let me see if I can find it. All right, I got my phone, but I did find it. It's actually happened a couple times recently. So yeah, it's like technical issues I Google sometimes. And it's like, you know, I get an error message within an app on my Android phone within a context, like a situation. And I try to put all that in. And a lot of times it works in Google, like when I'm doing like coding or something. But it just kept returning like, here's how to use the app in this Android, like the Android app, you know, and and no matter how many times like I rearranged it or whatever and say like, no, I'm getting this error message within this app on my Android phone, because if I didn't say Android, it would keep giving me irrelevant things. You know, I was trying to find like other people who had this problem who posted about it, and it wouldn't find that. And then another thing was, I was trying to find settings, particular settings in some part of the settings menu. Anyway, it doesn't really matter, but it's like these like 4-piece queries that was, I was being failed by Google. And another one was I was searching like, why is piece de la resistance? Why is it that phrase? Like, why is it piece of the resistance? Like if something is like, you know, like the main piece in like a collection of art or whatever, like why is that, where does that resistance come from? And that one wasn't as bad, but it did fail me a few times. It kept trying to like translate it for me in French, you know, and it was like, you know, it's like, it means piece of the resistance. I'm like, no, I'm trying to, you know, so like that's where ChatGPT and these things will have like a little more ability to understand context and then track down information for you a little better. And that's obviously why Microsoft had spent whatever $1 billion acquiring it or whatever they did. And that's why, you know, potentially Google won't, you know, be the leaderboard on search for the first time in like 20 years eventually. So in that way, it's an improvement. But in the way of like, now I don't need a lawyer. I can have ChatGPT lawyer do it for me, or I don't even need a coder. Like I have a lot of friends who are trying to get into coding and they're like, how much is it worth it? Because there's ChatGPT, you know, because every time they sit down with an assignment and they're like, I have to code this, you can just tell ChatGPT like, you know, make this piece of the code for me, make this piece of the code for me. And part of the issue is like when you get hired at a company as a software engineer, like the vast majority of what you're doing is not, I mean, I don't want to say like, I mean, I think you could say that like that boldly, like it's not creating new code from scratch. There's often an existing code base. And so you have to like go into the code base, you know, look for the parts, find it, and then be like, I want to modify this or create a new piece there. But you're often working in an existing layered code base. So that's not ChatGPTable yet. And then unsophisticated people who, might just have limited attention span for this stuff, and I understand, will just constantly say yet at the end of everything. Well, yeah, not yet, not yet. And then at some point, I mean, because there's like a doomsday fictional narrative that I guess is entertaining, but I think it's kind of lame. I think we can come up with better fiction than that. I mean, I basically, my take on that is that I think if the human race is able to replace more and more of its clerical jobs with AI, we will find things for us to do. Like in a sense, the human race is an art project and already. So like, you need less people working the agricultural fields, or there's so many examples that are probably better than what I can think of off the top of my head, but old things, old jobs that are gone, that are still around in very, very smaller amounts, not completely gone, but because there's like people doing everything. There's people who only, practice a certain kind of sword form from like 800 years ago. And there's, that's what I mean. It's kind of like an art project. It's such a giant collective. So I think that's my take on it. I don't feel very doomsday-y about it, about AI. And then, if you have to work with it, you're very actually frustrated and unimpressed in a lot of ways. And that's another thing too. Like part of that is because our brains are really good at catching up and adapting. It's like they used to say this, where like when they talk about like Neanderthals or like humans from like 50,000 years ago, if we found like a frozen one and we were able to unfreeze them, assuming they weren't like old or anything, yeah, like maybe a child or something. The idea was like, could you educate that child, and could they fly like a helicopter or something modern? And it's like the thinking scientifically is yes, because there doesn't appear to be anything significant, at least in terms of gross anatomy, with our brains. Like we seem to have the same brains as we did 50,000 years ago as now. And if you look at genetic change, I'll say, I won't say progress, but like change, that rate, at least linearly extrapolated, which there's probably issues with that. There doesn't seem to be that. There could have been that much difference, assuming this emergent complex network system couldn't have radically different function with a few changes, which I think is possible, but that is the inference. So it's just an opinion. It's a mainstream scientific opinion that if you dethaw Homo sapiens or Homo anything from 50,000 years ago, they probably would be able to fly a helicopter. And the reason, I mean, if you train it and teach it just like anybody today, they basically have the same learning capacity as we do, more or less. And the reason I bring that up is that I think just like kids got used to iPads and smartphones really fast, like within a day or two, I got used to ChatGPT and was annoyed with it and unimpressed with it. And even though it's from a machine learning standpoint, it's extremely impressive. It's kind of insane that in a way that you can take not all collective knowledge, but a lot of it in the format of human language, which is got a lot of like contours to it, and probabilistically map that on like whatever it is, however many 10 or 100 billion parameters, but like reorganize all that knowledge into like a completely different, almost mathematical space, and then be able to ping it and get things back that seem to make sense, is crazy. And the fact that you know, in a lot of ways, a lot of that didn't have to be done manually, which is a whole nother video about how much manual work actually goes into building these models. But the fact that, you know, like that's always the issue with like these like Google DeepMind research projects, where they, you know, have chess or StarCraft or Go, or recently they had Stratego. And the way it gets hyped is that like they have this thing working now, and it's almost like in a box, and you could sort of apply it, or it's a tool and you could apply it to anything, but it overlooks the, you know, who knows, like 50, 100 PhDs they had putting a couple years into that. I have no idea what their staff is at Google DeepMind. I mean, you could probably guesstimate it from their budgets, which are like 500 million a year, and a lot of those are server costs. But somebody probably knows. So my point is, like, there's a lot of manual work because they have to like break it down and see where it's failing, and sometimes build little like almost like stair steps for it. You know, it's not the science fiction like concept of like, oh, it's just like the perfect algorithm and it's got a perfectly like smooth cortex. It's a baby, you know, with no input, and it just inhales and builds these complex models, and you just leave it alone and suddenly it's beyond us and it's super wise. There's a lot of manual work that goes into it, but the fact that it's not all manual work, the fact that you can simply give it millions and millions of examples and it can find a lot of patterns in that by itself and store it in a way that's almost invisible to us, black boxy kind of, and how it's storing that and everything, is pretty cool. It's pretty remarkable compared to where neural networks were even 20 years ago. I mean, obviously even 5 years ago, but all that said, you work with it, you get used to it really fast, and all you see is like its problems. And if it was 10 times better, 100 times better, I think the same thing would happen. I think we're good at delegating. I think we could figure out how to use things that were way more functional and figure out what we want to do with our time and find more problems in the infinite space of problems of reality to work on. So that's my take. You know, it's a fun thing to do if you want to mess with ChatGPT and you're trying to think of you don't want to like Google like stuff you could just Google, or you're not interested in code because you don't need to know that. I like Googling, like making a diagnose fictional characters is what I'm trying to say. So like if you step through it, like for instance, I'm like, I'm not huge into Star Wars, but like, what are the limitations of the AI in Star Wars? And it gives me a list of 9 things, at least in this version. I'm sure if I reran it or you run it, you're going to get a different list, but a slightly different list. But like the first one says lack of creativity and initiative, and then it gives an example. Language constraints. Many droids can understand and communicate in various languages. The linguistic abilities are still confined to their programming. They struggle with understanding or using certain languages, dialects, or slang. Oh, that's interesting. One of the problems is resistance to the force. Okay. Anyway, but what's fun is to then take it to the next level and ask to diagnose. What medical diagnose is the most applicable to AI in Star Wars? After I've asked it to list out its problems. The most applicable medical diagnosis describe the limitations and nature of AI, would be something along the lines of, and I've never heard of this syndrome, NSAI syndrome, non-sentient artificial intelligence syndrome. It would serve as a concept. Oh, so it's kind of confabulating, actually. All right. Well, a better example is, what psychiatric issues does Batman suffer from? Let's just do something. Yeah, it just invented a syndrome. I guess in the future I could like try to split screen this, but I don't know if I'll get better at this. I'm still struggling with my camera. I have no idea why this is. Batman, fictional character from DC Comics. Okay, so they give him PTSD, obsessive compulsive, depression and grief, social isolation. Is that a medical diagnosis? I guess so. Narcissism, and then antisocial traits. I wonder if I regenerate, if I have it do it again. Let's see if it gives it the same list. Yeah, it just drops one of them. I don't remember which one, but now I'm looking at 5. Anyway, I don't know. I don't know if that's entertaining to you, but there are, or get into an argument with it about its own existence. You're going to hit a wall though at some point, because it does. It will act like it will. It changes its mind or contrition with you, but then it doesn't act on it, And I'm gonna stick some memes, and that's it for this video. All right, later.